The flame has lit up the world from within. All things, individually and collectively, are interpenetrated and flooded by it. You who mould the manifold so as to breathe your life into it, I pray to you. The first verse of the universe pours forth like a sea of mystery. Out of the void, unmanifest silence. Space-time comes into existence, unseen shaping, swirling, unfurling. Hydrogen, helium, divine is revealed within galactic whirlpools. As energy flows in, a star collapses, supernova explosion, a cloud of cosmic debris. Drawn together by gravity, by the mystery of attraction, primordial bonding, universe action, stardust swirling, swarming gases, organizing and forming masses. See that the sun is the one that spun the 9 others. Give birth to Mother Earth and her sisters and brothers. Mercury, Venus, Mars and Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. Everyone is the sun. The sun is the one. Everyone. Everybody better wake up. And the earth gave birth to continents and oceans, shaping and shaking in waves of emotion, crashes of lightning, bombarding and striking, exposing the globes that glows like a strobe, and setting the stage for the first cell of life. So simple, so basic, so primal that I place it at the top of the chain from which all life sprang. More forms adorn the earth as they bring diversity, dispersing the song of creation. Ring in the dawn, sing along in celebration. I just want to celebrate life. I just want to celebrate Earth. I just want to celebrate the cosmos. I just want to celebrate. The sea comes alive, starts to thrive with new life forms. Storm swept the planet, plants crept on granite enchanted by the sun's solar power. The earth gave birth to green leaves and flowers. Lava flows, mountains rose, tropical islands, forests and meadows, fed by the freshwater streams, the veins, heavenly rains drain back to the sea. The fish are set free as they swim onto sand. Fins turn to limbs and they limp onto land. Amphibians, reptiles, new styles of creature, seeing through new being, the range of her features. The earth, your mother, gave birth to eyesight, looking within as she spins in the sunlight. On to the dawn, to the day of the dinosaur, pterodactyl soars, Tyrannosaurus rex, towering, devouring, so who's up next? Mammals and primates, all life interrelated, divinely created. So don't you think it's time we celebrate? I just want to celebrate life. I just want to celebrate Earth. I just want to celebrate the cosmos. I just want to celebrate. So I first became involved in the conservation of nature back in 1979 in a rather mysterious fashion. I was living in northern New South Wales at a place called the Channon in a community with a bunch of, we were all I guess in our 20s and early 30s, we'd come together to build a meditation centre in the forest, a Buddhist meditation centre, and organise meditation retreats. And out of the first of those retreats, which were run by an Englishman wearing Thai Buddhist robes, whose name was Lumpi, but later became Christopher Titmus. Out of those first retreats, 20 of us all found $1,000 each to buy a piece of land, and which we call Bodhi Farm, and which is Bodhi Farm had its 40th birthday last year, and so it's still going strong. So in August of 1979, I'd been there for a couple of years. My first son, Bodhi, was the first born on that community and was named after the community. He was you know, 2.5 years old, and I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life meditating and building houses and delivering babies and growing veggies and stuff, but I found myself one Sunday at the Chano Market, the local sort of monthly produce market, and in between sets, when the band had stopped, one of my neighbours got up on the stage and appealed for help, saying that the Forestry Commission were coming in the next day to log the rainforest at the end of Terania Creek Road, and could people come and help to stop that. And I'd never been to the end of Terania Creek Road. It was just the valley below where we were living. I didn't know that there were rainforests there. I didn't know that there were rainforests in Australia. I didn't know what a rainforest was. In fact, hardly anybody knew anything about it. The word rainforest wasn't really part of the vocabulary. Up around Lismore, it wasn't called the rainforest, it was called the bastard scrub. And there was nothing romantic about it or beautiful about it. It was dark and gloomy and wet and full of leeches and thorns and things. And anyway, I had I didn't have a clue. I didn't have any I had no interest in ecology or conservation. I loved the bush, and you know, we lived in the bush and so on. But anyway, I went along just because I was into community and into the neighbourhood and into helping neighbours when they asked for help. And that's the only reason I was there. But something happened to me there, which I can't really explain, but which I still haven't recovered from, where I felt like I could hear the trees calling out to me and asking for my help, you know. And I didn't really think that trees could do that, so it caused considerable kind of cognitive dissonance, I suppose. You know, didn't know if I was going crazy or what was going on. But, you know, pretty soon it settled down, and before I knew it, I'd kind of completely surrendered to this new direction that my life was taking. I stopped meditating. I was far too busy now writing funding proposals and, you know, action alerts and press releases and so on, and I became utterly obsessed and dedicated to this campaign, as did so many of the people at that time. And those first blockades were incredibly successful. I can't tell you how easy it was. I think now that maybe the society had not yet developed any antibodies to those kinds of expression of people climbing up into the trees and chaining themselves to bulldozers. They'd never seen it before, and so it was just really easy to be the first item on the news night after night. And you know, around Lismore, people were talking to each other in hushed tones, saying, "Have you heard? The hippies have gone nuts." You know, it was like that nobody could believe that this was happening, because it was totally unprecedented. Nothing like that had ever happened before. As I say, it was really successful, and obviously the time was right. It was ripe for that kind of a thing to happen, because less than 2 years later, and about 200 arrests in the forest, and you know, lots of media and so on, an opinion poll found that more than 70% of the people of New South Wales wanted an end to rainforest logging. And at that time, the government of Neville Rand, the Labor government of that day, was just like, okay then, and created a string of national parks from the Border Ranges all the way down to Barrington Tops north of Newcastle, including the Nightcap National Park near Lismore, which included the few hundred hectares where we'd been, you know, doing our antics and, you know, getting arrested and climbing in the trees and so on. So that was fantastic, and I guess in the process, you know, we'd begun to get a bit of an education in rainforest and rainforest conservation, and so it came as no surprise when the following year we got, I can't remember, I mean there was no emails in those days, so it must have been a letter that we received from a group that was then known as the Tasmanian Wilderness Society, run by a dole bludger called Bob Brown, and saying that they wanted to do a blockade down there to protect the temperate rainforests from a dam that was being built on the Franklin River. And so, you know, 2 combi loads of hippies headed down that way, and we helped set up the base camp at Strawn, and relieved these totally exhausted Wilderness Society people in their office and did office work for a week or two, and then we went upriver and we taught. As the blockade began, day after day, this boat, the JLM, would bring 100 people up from Strahan upriver to the blockade, and they'd come from Melbourne, mainly Melbourne, but also further afield, to get arrested and make their stand and then go home. And there was more than 3,000 people came from all over the country to that remote wilderness. More than 1,500 people were arrested, and once again, we were successful. We timed that blockade to coincide with the federal elections of 1982, and in the run-up to those elections, all of a sudden, the debate between, the politicians had left the front page, and the Franklin River was on the front page, and so 10 days before the elections, the leader of the opposition, Bob Hawke, seeing the writing on the wall, announced that if elected, the ALP would stop the dam. That's what we've been waiting for. I think more than 1,100 people who were upriver at that time left Tasmania, and we fanned out to a dozen marginal electorates around the country between Perth and Brisbane and all points between. Anywhere where less than 2 percentage points separated the major parties in the opinion polls. And we went from door to door in those electorates, asking people to vote for the ALP to save the Franklin, and each of those electorates swung to the ALP, and Bob Hawke's first words when he was elected were, "The dam will not be built," because he knew that that's what had led to his victory. So they were very heady days, and we thought that this was just the beginning, and that it was going to be only a matter of time before we could save the rest of the world. But it didn't turn out that way, and as it turned out, that was really the high water mark, and the tide's been kind of going down ever since for that kind of activism.
It's a work in progress.
Work in progress. But anyway, the year after that, we got a call from the Wilderness. It wasn't a Wilderness Society. It was, I forget what they were called. The group from is it Douglas Shire?
Oh yeah.
Anyway. Mike Berwick, he became mayor, but before that he was running this wilderness action group, and they said, could we come up and do a blockade to stop the road that they wanted to build from Cape Trib to Bloomfield through the heart of the tropical rainforest. And so this time there were 60 of us from Nimbin and the area that came up. We lost that particular battle in that the road was eventually pushed through, and I drove it for the first time yesterday. But the main reason we wanted to stop that road was because of the development that was going to accompany it, that the kind of developments that you see at Cape Trib today, there was a plan that would continue all the way to north, and that the real estate agents were planning to be subdividing everything in sight. And so even though the road was pushed through and continues to exist, the attention that blockade created all around the country led to the creation of the Wet Tropics National Parks and eventual World Heritage listing, and so the development stopped at Cape Trib. And so that was all just like very exciting and very uplifting, of course, as you can imagine. But at the same time, we were learning about what was happening to rainforests and to forests all over the world. And we realised that for every forest that had been saved in Australia, for every forest that had been saved in the world during the first half of the 1980s, 1,000 forests had been lost. And clearly there was no way to save the planet one forest at a time. That unless we could address the underlying psychological or spiritual disease that allows modern humans to imagine that we can somehow profit from the destruction of our own life support systems, clearly these actions were going to be of no lasting significance, of no particular significance for the future of the world. If, the global warming continues and the average temperature goes up by 5 or 6 degrees, all the rainforests will be lost. The ones that we save will go just, like a decade or two after the ones that we didn't save. It'll make no difference. And so in that quest to understand why human beings behave in such a self-defeating fashion, Paul Ehrlich said, we are sawing off the branch that we're sitting on. Clearly indicating some kind of psychological problem, that no matter how much the timber in that branch might be worth, it's a stupid thing to do. And in a similar vein, James Lovelock, who created the Gaia theory, the idea that the Earth itself is a living, integrated organisms, and all of the species are like cells in the larger body of the Earth, he said that what we're doing to the rainforests is as if the brain were to decide it was the most important organ in the body and started mining the liver. So, from this metaphor, we get a picture of this highly intelligent brain, technically adroit, able to perform such an operation, but clearly deluded, not understanding that it inhabits the same body as the liver, and that there's no reason that's good enough to justify, proceeding in this way. And so finally, in about 1986 or 1987, I came upon a philosophy of nature called deep ecology, where for the first time I felt that my questions were being answered in a way that satisfied me. The term deep ecology was coined by Arnie Ness, who was then the professor of philosophy at Oslo University. And according to Ness, underlying all of the symptoms of the environmental crisis is the illusion of separation between human beings and the rest of the natural world, the illusion of separation. So that might sound a little bit kind of mystical and poetic, but to understand what Ness meant by that, all you have to do is hold your breath for 5 minutes while you think about it. Yeah. And very, very quickly you understand that he wasn't talking about anything. It's talking very down to earth, very practical, very easy to demonstrate to ourselves what he meant by that. That even if we wanted to, there is no way that we could separate ourselves from the rest of the natural world, even for a few minutes. And that every time we breathe, every time we drink, every time we eat, we're partaking of the earth. There's an exchange of gases, there's an exchange of fluids, there's an exchange of material between the earth and ourselves. And that actually there is no out there. It's all in here, it's all cycling through itself over and over again in a perpetual way. So there's nothing too challenging about this as an intellectual idea, but the trouble is that according to Ness, this illusion of separation is generated by anthropocentrism or human-centeredness, the idea that human beings are the centre of everything. We are the crown of creation. We are the measure of all being. We are almost like angels, somewhere between God and angels, and there's this kind of hierarchy, and we are above everything else in the hierarchy. And this human-centeredness goes back thousands and thousands of years, at least as far as the Old Testament, when we were told that humans are to subdue, God orders humans to subdue and dominate nature, and he says that nature will be in fear and trembling of us. And only human beings have a soul, only man is created in God's image, and so on and so on and so on. And so Arnie Ness said that because these ideas have been around for so long, they've entirely corrupted our psyche, and every institution in the society is has these at their foundation. And so he says, we're not going to be able to think our way out of the mess, that it's far too deep for that. We're not going to be able to... He said, famously, he said that ecological ideas aren't enough to save us. What we need is ecological identity, ecological self. And the work that I do in deep ecology is basically an attempt to understand what that means, what is our ecological identity, and how do we nourish that? How do we support and encourage ecological identity so that we have a physical experience of being part of the earth, so that this isn't just an idea in our heads any longer, but this is who we are, this is who I am. And so I'll get into that more later. You know, one particular institution is the economic system that our society is based on, and if you look into the philosophy of economics and the history of economics, you'll find that value is created by human beings. Nothing has any value until we humans put our labour and intelligence into it. The earth itself is just dirt until we, clever beings, turn it into something else. We mould it, we manufacture it, we do something with it, and that's where value comes from. And as a result of that, it means that nature itself has no value. And if you look at any, cost-benefit analysis, you'll see that if you're looking into the costs and benefits of a particular development, say cutting down a particular forest, the fact that the trees are the home of the animals, the fact that the roots hold the soil together, the fact that the leaves create oxygen, all of these things are externalities to the economic equation. They're not given any value. And that means that the dice are loaded. The cost-benefit analysis always shows that the benefits of destroying nature outweigh the cost, because nature has no value and is merely a resource, because according to this way of looking at things, the only thing that has intrinsic value is human beings, and everything else may only have instrumental value because it happens to be a resource that's useful for us. And so when you are embedded in a culture that is based upon these kinds of institutions, merely to know that, oh, I am part of nature, the incredible momentum of the industrial growth society, it's impossible to swim against that current without a much, much more profound rootedness in the earth and a sense of empowerment from the earth to behave and to think in a different fashion. The very language that we speak conspires against us. Even to talk about the environment makes it sound as if it's over there somewhere, and it conceals the fact that the nature in here and the nature out there are identical, are one and the same, are continuous. And so my favourite example, I found out about a little town in Texas called Earth. And Earth, Texas, although it has less than 1,000 inhabitants, if you look it up, you'll see that it's spelled with an uppercase E, because every place created by human beings gets an uppercase E. Whereas Earth, solar system, if you put an uppercase E on that, your spell check will correct it, because the Earth itself doesn't get an uppercase because it's just sort of, it wasn't created by humans. It doesn't get lifted up in that way. It doesn't get exalted with an uppercase. So, when you start looking for it, you'll see everywhere, you'll see the signs of that anthropocentrism, and how do we move against that? So it was with these thoughts in mind, and the only clue that Arnie Ness gave was, he said that he thought what was needed were community therapies to heal our relationship with the widest of all communities, that of all living beings. And And so I started to think about how we could create such community therapies to take us from having ecological ideas, which we certainly had, to that deeper place of becoming ecological beings. And it was at this time that I met my teacher, Joanna Macy. She came to Australia in 1987 for the first time, and she was then doing a workshop she called Despair and Empowerment. And it was through meeting her and experiencing her despair and empowerment work, and her meeting me and me kind of haranguing her about deep ecology, that we created the first of the experiential deep ecology processes, the Council of All Beings. And we wrote a book the following year with Auntie Ness called Thinking Like a Mountain Towards a Council of All Beings. And that's been translated into a dozen languages in the meantime. And I can't say that it's swept all before it or anything, but it's had a small amount of success in communicating these ideas. So Joanna's work was very interesting, and was the next big kind of shift for me after the original shift of Terania Creek and then discovering deep ecology. And what she taught me was that we live in a culture of denial, where there's a denial of some of our most basic feelings, that the so-called bad feelings that people aren't permitted to experience, let alone to share with each other. So she's talking about grief and anguish and terror and rage, and she points out that these are part of our intelligence, and that by suppressing these we suppress a really important part of ourselves, and that we suppress these feelings because we are afraid of them. We've been taught to be afraid of these feelings, and that if I were to fully open myself to the full extent of the anguish that I feel about what's happening to my world, surely that would crush me. I would become hopelessly depressed. Maybe I'd commit suicide. Something terrible would happen. But Joanna said, no, if you get together with a circle of people and create an agreement that makes a safe container for these feelings, and then invite these feelings, exactly the opposite happens. That what happens is that intelligence that had been suppressed surges out, and we experience that as empowerment. And that's exactly what happened in the weekend that I did with her. And so anyway, we put that together with the philosophy of deep ecology, which was looking for how to become a therapy, and by bringing Joanna's work together with those ideas, we began the experiential deep ecology work, which both of us and many other people continue to this day. States and continue to do Council of All Beings as well as their other work. I did it in Australia, and about a year later, I wrote her a letter, and I, because I'd had no experience in facilitation up to this point, and so I said to her, I keep having what seem to be really good ideas about different processes that we could use in this work. And every time I try a new process, it works. And I can't understand it, I was thinking, like maybe 1 in 10 would work, but it's not like that. What's going on? And she wrote back saying that she had the same experience, and had come to the conclusion that it's not the particular processes that we use that achieve that result of people opening themselves into that wider sense of connection, but it's the intention that the participants bring, that whenever a group of people comes together with the shared intention to heal that illusion of separation, the earth comes rushing back in. The earth never pushed us out, that if there's any separation, it's entirely coming from our side, and the moment that we relax that, and the moment that we make that invitation, then life rushes back in, and that's why whatever we do in those workshops, that's congruent with the intention, will be a good vehicle for it. And so that was like a very, it means that it's very easy to facilitate this work, because all that you have to do is make sure that everybody's on the same page, and it basically runs itself. You don't need to be a good facilitator, or to know everything off by heart or anything like that. And so we wrote, after this we wrote Thinking Like a Mountain, more or less like a recipe book, where you don't have to have done this 20 times before you can try it for yourself. You try it, and if you can follow our recipe, or you can make up your own recipe, but the only secret is to make sure that everybody understands why we're here together, and then it just works by itself. A year after that, I was starting to work with a group in the United States called Earth First, both in activism and organising weekend workshops around the United States. And I found myself at a ceremony being conducted by some indigenous people on a mesa in the southwest of the United States, Hopi people. And there was only a handful of people, outsiders who were there, and there was several hundred of the Hopi. And to my astonishment, I saw that they were doing a Council of All Beings. And I thought Joanna and I had invented that 2 years earlier, and they said that they'd been doing it for 10,000 years. And afterwards, as I looked into it, I found that I couldn't find a single example of an indigenous culture that still had its ceremonies and rituals intact, that didn't have such processes whereby the people would gather regularly, all of the community, the children as well, and in one way or another acknowledge our interconnectedness with the wider Earth community, and honour all of our relations, and pay homage to all of that, and create a culture of respect for that more than human world, and maybe realise that another reason why these workshops are so easy to do, and why they invariably work to transform us, is because this is something that we've been doing for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's only very, very recently that our ancestors, the ancestors of we modern people, where these ceremonies were suppressed brutally by the Christianity and by other forces. And so that when we open ourselves to that invitation to find our way back into connection with nature, it just feels like coming home or something like that. It doesn't. It's not a long way away or anything like that.
Remembering.
So this talk is titled Deep Ecology and the Conservation of Nature, and so I'm going to segue to some talk about the conservation of nature in a minute. But before I do, maybe would you be interested to try one brief experiential process, a deep ecology process? Because everything, it's not something that you can get merely by hearing the words or by thinking about it. Like, it's experiential, and so the thing I'm going to do will only take 5 minutes, and but it'll give you a taste of what we do in the workshops. I'm hoping to be back this time next year to do a weekend workshop up here, and I'd love all of your help in when the time comes in spreading the word about it and so on. So if you, shall we do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, perfect. So what I'd like you to do is to turn to the person that's sitting next to you, experiential process and an understanding, because I could have just given a short talk about the evolution of the hand, but it's a completely different understanding that comes to you from doing that kind of a process. And that's, is there anyone that would like to share anything about their experience with that before we move on?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, it felt very much like guided meditation, but guided discovery, and introduction to almost a synesthetic sort of point of discovery, because it was vocal and you thought about what was going on, but via it created more than just the one sense of sound or sight, and very much relied back onto the hand or to your own senses, but a heightened, which is important in thought and discovery and also problem solving. I like the use of it very much.
Back in the mid-80s, I used to do a lot of work in the United States with a group called Earth First, and I was their like Australian correspondent to their newspaper, and up until that connection, that they made the connection with Australia, they were just a bunch of like redneck cowboy kind of earth warriors, and mainly what they did was sabotage. That they would, put sugar in the fuel tank of machinery, those kind of things to stop the machines. And what we were doing was like non-violent direct action, where we were more interested in reaching out and touching people and changing people's minds than we were just in, the trouble with destroying machinery is that the machinery is always insured, and it just means that more machinery gets built, And when Earth First, were printing my reports, they were amazed. They said, "Oh, look, our brothers and sisters in Australia are having these successes without, sabotage," and so they began to include, not that they stopped doing sabotage, but they began to include the kinds of non-violent actions that we were doing in Australia. And I used to go over there every year during the 90s, and I'd go to their festivals and road shows and things like that. And a lot of this work spread through one of the outcomes of the workshop is a sense of empowerment, and one of the difficulties that the environment movement has is that there's a tremendous rate of burnout. People who are constantly looking at the bad news of what's happening to our world. It's very difficult psychologically to remain focused on this, and that's why most people out there, they see the headline and then they turn the page because it's painful. And so unless we have a kind of a practice that allows us to process that pain in some way, it is debilitating, and it's it's not healthy. And so that's why the Joanna's despair and empowerment piece is always part of every workshop that I do, and in a way perhaps the most important part, because the empowerment that comes from that, the experience of empowerment, it means that all of us are wandering around with a feeling of defeat and a feeling of it's too late. What can one person do anyway? And so on. And it's extraordinary how doing this despair and empowerment work, all of that just disappears, and all of a sudden we just feel invigorated and enthusiastic and ready to take the next step, and so on. I, as an activist now for nearly 40 years, I'm determined to find a way of continuing to be able to do this without becoming so distressed that I can't function the way that happens to many people. So by facilitating these workshops, I'm also a participant. And one of the things that I've noticed is that sense of empowerment and strength that comes from sharing a weekend like this, it lasts me for about 5 or 6 weeks usually, And so that it's not, it's something that, it's a practice. It's a bit like, you know, say a meditation practice. It's all very well to meditate, but unless you meditate in some regular kind of a way, you're probably not going to get, you know, any real movement, any real change. And so, for my own spiritual practice, I need to participate in, you know, preferably 8 or 10 weekend workshops like this a year. And so next month I'll be doing, next weekend I'll be doing a workshop in Newcastle. Next month I'll do one in Sydney, and October in Brisbane, November in Melbourne, and so on. And of course, I love to share these things with other people, and all of the fees that people pay to do the workshop goes into nature conservation, so it's a really good way of raising funds for the things I'm involved with and I believe in. But underneath all of that, it's what I need in order to be working at my best. You know, I need to be doing this in a regular way. And once again, all the Indigenous societies that you look at, these ceremonies are a regular part of, it's just a part of everyday life. It's not just something that happens once a year at Christmas or something like that. Back also in the late 80s, we started working in Ecuador, where some of the most diverse rainforests in the world are found in the headwaters of the Amazon in Ecuador. And we found our way there once again in a random fashion. We received an aerogram from one Jaime Levy, who was a Peace Corps volunteer, an American, working with an indigenous group called the Awa on the Colombian border, and somehow he'd heard that the Rainforest Information Centre, our group, was helping to protect rainforests, and he said, the Awa need help, their rainforests are being under attack. And one of our volunteers, all of us are volunteers, we've never had a payroll, no one's ever been paid for doing this work. One of our volunteers said that he wanted to go to Ecuador, so we had a benefit concert to raise the fare and sent him to Ecuador, and he ended up living there for the next 7 or 8 years, as it turned out, and doing the most incredible work. And he was able to protect the Awa. It's quite an interesting story, the way that worked. That it turned out that the main reason why the colonisation of their rainforest was taking place was that the government of Ecuador at that time had created land reform laws which allowed a poor person to acquire land just by finding some land that was not being utilised, and by fencing it and clearing that land, that was the first step to getting title on the land.
Hey, that's what they did in Australia.
Exactly, you know. And so the trouble was that this land that, you know, towards Colombia was already occupied by these indigenous people whose ancestors had been living there for thousands of years, but these people didn't have a title, they didn't have the paperwork for their land. And in order to get title to the land had to be demarcated. There had to be a line on the ground that corresponded to the line on the map. And at that time also, the same thing was happening in Brazil, where the musician Sting was funding the demarcation of some of the lands of the Amazonian indigenous, and what they were doing was going out with cement posts and putting a large cement post along the border of the land every, I don't know, a few hundred metres or something like that. So, I don't know Brazil, but in Ecuador, a cement post like that would be swallowed by the rainforest in about 3 months, and you'd never find it again, you know. And so what Doug did with the Awa is that they cleared a swathe of forest along the line, corresponding to the line on the map that showed the Awa territory, and I think it was they cleared a swathe of forest maybe 20 metres wide, huge work, you know, can't remember how many, but dozens and dozens of kilometres of this clearing, and then they planted conspicuous fruit trees along that line so that there would be a permanent living visible fence, and they chose trees that were the food of the monkeys, which was the main part of the awa diet, so that as the awa patrolled that fence and, you know, kept that area clear, there'd always be plenty of monkeys there for them to eat because of the fruit on those trees. And so that project succeeded, and the awa, the colonisation into the awa territory stopped. But one of the other projects that Doug Ferguson, our volunteer there, got involved with was called the Los Cedros Biological Reserve. And what happened was another character in this is an American called Jose de Coo, who was a draft dodger from California, who found his way, in order to escape the Vietnam War and being conscripted to go to Vietnam, he fled America and found his way to Ecuador, and eventually ran out of money and found himself working as a labourer for Don Pablo's estate. And as a landless, poor peasant labourer, his only way ahead was to colonise a piece of land, to find a piece of land and begin to clear it. And so he moved up the mountain from Don Pablo's place to the point where the frontier of the colonisation was taking place up in the mountains. And this was a place called the Los Cedros Plateau. And there, Jose had this epiphany where he suddenly saw that this was terrible and that this forest was sacred and shouldn't be cleared. And he went looking for help to try and stop the colonisation, and ran into my colleague Doug, and he grabbed Doug and somehow got him to have a look at this. And so then Doug called me, and we ended up getting a grant from the Australian government, which was, so this was still Bob Hawke's government, who was still feeling very grateful to the conservation movement for having got them into power in the first place, and they'd set up a grant program so that projects like this could get funded, which couldn't happen today. But anyway, they funded us to buy out all of the colonists who had already started to colonise the Los Cedros Plateau. They'd already done some work in clearing it, and so we paid them for the work that they'd done so that they could go on and do their colonising somewhere else. And the Ecuadorian government, completely stunned to discover that the Australian government was interested in something like this, then gave us the title to the entire plateau and 7,000 hectares that became the Los Cedros Biological Reserve. And we've then been, Jose is still there as the director of that reserve, and we've been supporting him from time to time. Every time there's a threat, he writes to us, and what it may be illegal logging or poaching of the animals or more colonisation or whatever it is, we'll send him a little bit of money, we'll raise some money for him, and so far we've been able to protect it successfully. And meanwhile, all around that part of the world, nearly everything else is being degraded and destroyed, so that one of the many scientific researchers whose research is based at Los Cedros, Professor Bitty Roy from the University of Oregon, she says that it's now the best preserved watershed in Western Ecuador, Los Cedros, only because everything else, nothing else is so tenaciously protected as that. But last year we discovered that a Canadian logging company, a Canadian mining company, excuse me, had been corruptly awarded a mining concession over Los Cedros, and as we looked into that, we discovered that more than 2 million hectares of protected forests and indigenous reserves had been handed over to mining companies from all around the world.
By who? Handed over by who? By
a corrupt government, which has since been replaced by a much better government, but the contracts have been signed, and we have to, at the moment we're fundraising for legal action to see if we can have some kind of a legal campaign that will rescind these concessions. And we're also, because many of the mining companies are Australian companies, one of the companies working at Los Cedros is BHP. So last month I had a workshop in Melbourne, and then we did a blockade of BHP's headquarters in Collins Street, Melbourne, and just doing all the things we always do to see if we can stop this latest threat. But anyway, the money that I'm raising for from any events that I'm taking part in these days, workshops and talks and things like that, that's where it's going. It's towards the legal case that we're building up to try and stop the mining at Los Cedros. Good luck.
So is the Australian government then, because of that title thing, is the Australian government involved legally in that?
No, but I mean the Australian government's involved because Austrade, that helps Australian companies abroad to become successful economically and so on, is supporting the mining industry, and so we are trying to, we're criticising that, saying, that Australian taxpayers spent all of this money creating this reserve 30 years ago, and now Australian taxpayers are spending money to support the companies that are destroying it. So we're getting publicity and so on, but the government isn't interested. Not this government is certainly not interested.
Is there any government people that are interested?
No.
Wow, that's pretty tragic situation. So what would be the answer to that then, John?
We'll just building up alliances with people all over the world. At the moment, there's one of the things that's interesting about Ecuador is that it was the first country in the world to enshrine the rights of nature in its constitution. About 10 years ago, the Ecuadorian constitution was rewritten, and so there's a large group of sort of legal people all over the world who are interested in this, just the way that human rights was something that was unheard of 100 years ago, and now it's included in legal systems all over the world. They believe that the rights of nature will have will gradually grow in its credibility, And so at the moment we're trying to get that group to become involved in creating a legal challenge based upon the constitution of the country, and the mining leases are unconstitutional. So I'll know within a week or two whether or not that's got legs, and if that doesn't work, we'll think of something else. Word to the mother. Word to the mother. I once was blind, but now I see. I understand that the planet is the source of me, literally. Just like a mum gives birth to a babe, Mother Earth's given birth to everything that's been made. Word to the mother, source of every other thing, every being in the ring of creation. And every individual is a manifestation of the grace innate in this place, space, and time, expressing the blessing, caressing my mind. Holy osmosis, that's what the cosmos is. Boom, universe, earth, human. From the beginning, the spinning universe possessed, the spiritual interior inside the manifest. Blessed with the blast from the past, free at last as the Big Bang rain sprang, sang from the start through the void, like a joy from the heart of the dark. And the light's the birthright of us all. You and I are all the firewall. A higher call inspires all with a sense of place. Let us find the divine mind behind every face. I've just begun to recognize the whole soul force. Word to the mother, word to the source. We've got to get back to the mother. We've got to get back to the earth. We've got to get back to the mother. We've got to get back to the earth. Word to the mother. So how dare we have the nerve to disturb the planetary source, the very force that brought us alive? If she ain't in effect, there ain't no way to survive. How can we see no wisdom from the ecosystem? This industrialized phase prays to pave highways. Yikes, 50,000 toxic sites. Nuclear power plants constructed with haste, without any clue what to do with the waste. Radiation seeping deep in the nation, losing patience with corporations and abusers, grinning like they're winning when we'll all be the losers. They ignore natural forces, deplete our resources. No remorse, we're of course holy horses. Mother, may I try and say why my society lost sight of the whole, as we try and we try till we die to control the earth dream that can never be tamed and that can never be sold and that can never be named. What's a shame and as lame is that we thought it was clever to dam every river ever. Never, never land is at hand until we see and rediscover there ain't no other. It's absurd to have to say it, but word to the mother. We've got to get back to the mother. We've got to get back to the earth. We've got to get back to the mother. We've got to get back to the earth. The story of the mother, as I reminisce, was enough to make this brother eco-feminist. How can we limit the limitless exponential growth potential? Economy is secondary, Earth's essential. The mother exists in every wave on the sea, in every bird in the sky, in every leaf on the tree. Community, unity, you and me, family, all of us children born of 4 billion years of the blood, sweat and tears of the earth. We need to let her be, let her go. Set her free, let her fly, let her flow, let her grow and unfold the way the mother intended. Activities that damage the earth must be suspended. Listen, because we're missing what the mother's advice is. She'll help us deal with ecological crises. She's mightier than Aphrodite or Isis, and twice as creative, illustrative of the point, when the earth gives birth to the now. Still, we try and kill every sacred cow. We need to chill until we see that no creature is my enemy. They're all kin to me. Earth is the remedy for the malady. She's the truth at the root of reality. The elements of my bones are left over from the swirling stardust of the supernova. Made by the earth and the breath of the one, reigns in the veins and the flames of the suns. In the heart, each part contains the sum of the whole. Earth body, earth spirit, universe, soul. Word to the mother. You gotta love her. We've gotta get back to the